Friends, there are just over 6 weeks until Election Day. We are almost there. There's also new polling from NBC News, and it shows a tight but shifting race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Joining us now, NBC News national political correspondent, the man with the numbers, Steve Kornacki. Bring us up to speed.
All right, Katie. Yeah, well, the bottom line here, overall, our national poll here has Harris 49, Trump 44. And, of course, this is a pretty significant departure. You know, this is our first poll, by the way, since Harris became the Democratic candidate where we've tested her against Trump. All of our previous polling for the past year had been Trump versus Biden. And in that polling, Trump had led Biden in all but one case. That was a tie. So just shows you how much it's shifted just since Kamala Harris replaced Joe Biden as the Democratic candidate. Some things that are powering Harris's current standing. Number one is a gender gap, a very big gender gap. Look, among men in our poll, Trump leads. His margin is 12 points, 52 to 40%. Among women, Harris leads. Look at this, by 21 points, 58 to 37, 21 and 12. You're looking at a gender gap there of 33 points. If that is something we actually see materialize on Election Day, that would be like 10 points higher than what we had in 2020, 2016. Both of those were historically high gender gaps. This would be something else altogether if this is what happened. And again, it's that, especially that big margin with women that is powering Harris right now. Then you also take a look at this by race. And what stands out here is you look at black voters. Now, historically, this is a core Democratic constituency, and you do see Harris at 85%, Trump at 7%. These are numbers sort of historically you'd expect to see for a Democrat versus a Republican. But when Joe Biden had been the Democratic candidate, his numbers were lagging, historically speaking, among black voters. You'd see him sometimes in the polls, somewhere in the 60s among black voters. Trump, for that matter, and there still are some polls out there that show this, Trump, had been running in the teens, maybe even the high teens among black voters. Again, that's not a huge number, it sounds like, but that would actually be very, very high for a Republican compared to the past. So the fact that in our poll, Harris has, sort of reestablished traditional Democratic levels with black voters, that's very significant. That's something Democrats were worried about under Joe Biden. You see, too, Harris, an improvement in her image. The basic question of do you have a positive or negative view of a candidate? We polled this just before she got in the race. We asked folks their opinion of her. It was 32% positive then. It is now 48% positive. You see she's slightly above water, a little bit higher positive than negative. And again, compare this to Joe Biden. This is the candidate Democrats had until the end of July. He's sitting underwater, 41-49, pretty much in the same range where Donald Trump is. So that's a key difference right there. Then finally, there is this, though. There's a lot of good news in this poll for Democrats, but if you're a Republican, you could take heart in this. Look at these issues, asking which candidate is better when it comes to securing the border and controlling immigration. When it comes to dealing with the economy, Trump by 21 points on the border and immigration, Trump by 9 on the economy. In our poll, we asked, what's the most important issue to you? The economy and inflation. You add them together, 40% of voters say that's their number one issue. You fold in immigration and the border, a majority of voters are citing something in that area as their top issue. And Trump does have right now in our poll the issue advantage there. So certainly that keeps him in the game.
Steve, I was looking at that gender gap that you just mentioned, 33 points, and that is such a striking number. As you underscored, it's higher than 2020 and 2016, if it holds. We've also seen some new polling out of the New York Times that shows Donald Trump is doing better in some battleground states, specifically in the Sun Belt. If there is a gender gap that remains at 33 points, how does Donald Trump overcome that? Is that just a national thing? Or if you're seeing numbers like that, does that mean Harris might actually, if it remains, be doing better in some of these battleground places? Makes sense of the contradictions between the NBC News stuff and the New York Times stuff for me.
Well, a couple ways of looking at it. And I'm just going back trying to go back in the screens here to call this up. And for some reason, here we go, taking a look again at that gender gap. Well, look, the answer on the gender gap from Trump's standpoint is gender gaps can work both ways. You see right now, this is netting out in Harris's benefit because her margin on the side of the gender gap where she's doing well, women, is bigger than Trump's margin on the side where he's doing well, men. But if Trump drives up his support with men, he could neutralize a lot of this. Or for that matter, if he were just to make a little bit in the way of headway here with women, he could erase it on that end, too. So there's possibilities for Trump in terms of attacking the gender gap that way. When you look at Trump in these new New York Times Siena polls you're talking about, doing a little bit better, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina. You compare those to the northern tier of battleground states, of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, certainly. Those states tend to be whiter demographically than the states in the Sun Belt. Now, we're showing you that Harris in our polls made improvement here among black voters, but this number here among Hispanic voters, a 19-point edge for Harris, that's basically where our poll had it when Joe Biden was still the Democratic candidate. And that historically is a low number there for Democrats. That would mark further improvement for Donald Trump from the strides he already made in 2020. And again, you look at a state like Georgia, population there, 10% Latino. There's possibility, Arizona, certainly, that can help Trump make strides in those states he may not be making in some of those northern states. And then the other big thing when you ask about reconciling different polls, and it's something I think just to keep in mind in general with any poll that comes out between now and Election Day, they are going to bounce around a little bit depending on the pollster. Sometimes there's going to be statistical noise, margin of error enters into these things. And so always, you have these poll averages. We maintain these poll averages and show you those too. And the poll averages can help you too. Just put in context any one individual poll that you're seeing.
Just the difficulty in finding reliable, likely voters. Steve Kornacki, thank you very much, as always. And joining us now, NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster, who is in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. What is Sturgeon Bay telling us, Shaq?
Well, Katie, let me tell you, this first is a county that has sided with the winner of every presidential election going back to 1996. So a lot of swing voters here, a lot of moderate voters here, and people who are telling me that they're still trying to make that ultimate decision. And, one nugget that has been reflected very clearly in my conversations here is what you heard Steve describing in terms of Vice President Harris's rise in favorability. Listen to some of those conversations. How has your opinion of Kamala Harris changed?
Mine has changed favorably because I was very negative about it. I just think she was like a nobody, didn't even know who she was. And she's done a reasonably good job of marketing.
I am surprised at how strong she is. I honestly kind of didn't know she was there for a few years because I didn't feel like she did a whole lot. I'd much rather have her than to be frightened of having Trump in the office for another 4 years.
I like her positive attitude that we're going to go forward. We're not going to go backwards.
I definitely have come to the conclusion that she's capable. I mean, and she's proved that in the debate, and she's proved that since then.
Katie, that last couple that you saw, they say they are traditionally Republican voters. He said his father would be rolling over in his grave if he even knew he was considering voting for a Democrat in this election. And one point that I heard from the Harris campaign when they saw we were here in this county, they say since Harris moved to the top of the ticket, they've gotten 300 new volunteer signups in this county alone. While that doesn't sound like a huge number, that's about 1% of the population here.
Oh, that's a big deal. Shaq Brewster. Shaq, thank you very much.